Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another episode of Buha's Block. On today's show, I am thrilled to be joined by Pete Zayas, one half of Laker Film Room. It's been a minute since we had Pete on. I think we had him on right before the season. A lot has happened since then. Pete, my Boricua hermano, how you doing today, man?
Pretty good, man. How you doing, man? ¿Cómo estás?
I'm doing well. So I wanted to have you on today to discuss the big decisions of the Lakers offseason. I think this is a pivotal summer for LA that will determine Luka's future with the franchise, the final act of LeBron's historic career, at the future of Austin Reaves, and we have the Lakers' financial flexibility and asset flexibility for the rest of the decade, depending on how aggressive they are this summer or next season. So I want to kick it to you first. What do you think is the biggest decision of the Lakers offseason?
How aggressive do they want to be pursuing that elusive center that they're looking for, right? And that's sort of an evaluation of how much does that future first, how much do you value it? How much do you value Dalton? Those are the two main. How much do you value Rui as well within that, that. But the pursuit of a center, I think there's like 5 different levels of center they could conceivably get depending on how aggressive that they want to be. Where do you stand on that idea, Jovan, of like how aggressive they should be in pursuing the guy versus the guy that can kind of fill in the gaps for now?
I think they should be aggressive. And I think that, I believe we spoke about this last time I had you on, of like, I'm of the belief that it is better to build the roster in the summer and then make the tweaks in the season. Even at, let's just say, hypothetically, you can make a 9 out of 10 trade at the deadline, but you can make a 7 out of 10 trade during the summer. I personally would rather make the 7 out of 10 trade, and maybe you're giving up an additional asset. The upside to me is you get the continuity of the regular season and building something together. Because I look back at last season, and I've said this before, of course you make the Luka trade 10 out of 10 times, but there was a continuity disruption there. There was also a continuity disruption with the DFS trade. And I think both trades I would remake if I'm the Lakers, and I think they were the right decisions. But if you look at that first 30, 20, 25, 30 games or so with D'Lo, that almost, there were some things that they built on that they were able to continue to apply with DFS and then with Luka. But in some ways, it was a bit of a wasted stretch to some degree. And I think they have gotten in this habit now, going back to, I would say, starting with the 2022 summer, where they have not really liked the trade market. And it's been understandable to a degree. But then they've almost resorted to, we're just going to wait till the trade deadline to get a slightly better trade, or maybe a much better trade. But then there's just this continuity disruption. And how many times have we heard, well, this group didn't really have much of a sample size this season together. And it's sort of like kicking the can down the road to next season. And you can only do that so many times when you have a 41-year-old LeBron James in year 23. So I think, I don't want to spoil my thing, because I'm going to take an even bigger step back and just look at which path they want to go down in terms of like building this roster. But I think I lean more toward finding that guy now. Now, if that guy's not there, you can't force it, right? But I think there are a couple of guys that I really like.
I love that point about the continuity and disrupting a team during the course of the season. And if you look back beyond just last trade deadline, like you said, that's been the team for quite a while now. When was the last time they built a really cohesive team that lasted throughout the course of the season?
2020, 2021, I guess.
Yeah, probably.
But that was derailed by injuries, and then they added Andre Drummond, and that changed the center dynamic. And I guess the title year, right? Maybe then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess in 23, they didn't change much, although they had added over the course of the summer. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you're saying 2023, 24?
So last season when they added Taurean Prince, they added all of that. It's just sort of the coaching decisions were so bizarre within that as well. But again, I think that they've done a decent job of rebounding from the Westbrook trade, taking a like 3 to 5 year view type of thing. But in order to do that, they haven't actually built a team that's like, oh, this makes sense. This is the team that it's going to be over the course of the summer that can actually go and contend. And I don't know, it's a little bittersweet. It was kind of a sad way to watch the LeBron and AD era die, is that like they never had one more shot at it. You know what I mean?
I agree. Yeah. And if they, let's just say hypothetically, right now it's looking like the most likely scenario is having that 5.7 taxpayer mid-level exception available to them. If they go sign even a Clint Capella, which I think that might be a little low for him, but a Clint Capella, a Steven Adams, someone in that type of range, and then just go into the season and be like, well, if this player isn't good enough to be a starter, let's go like make a trade at the deadline and trade Rui and Dalton and the first for something. Then it's like, well, then you have this 45, 50 game sample size that, again, I don't want to dismiss it entirely and say there's nothing you can learn or take away or develop over that stretch. But like if you're trading Rui, he's most likely a starter or a key bench guy. You're trading Dalton. Maybe you're developing him in year 2. You're trading a first round pick. So it's like, I just think that they've gotten a little too maybe reliant on the deadline excuse a little bit of, if we don't love what we have this summer, we'll just wait for the deadline. But then there's also like almost a shield, a sense of protection that comes with making a deadline trade, because then you have a built-in excuse of if it doesn't work out, well, you know, again, go back to the exit interview. How many times was it brought up? Well, we made the Luka trade. You know, we only had 25 games together with this group. And then, you know, I just think sometimes that can be, again, kind of kicking the can down the road with actually building that season's roster. And then it becomes about the next season. And it feels like they keep pushing it forward.
Yeah, I agree.
Any other thoughts on the center dynamic?
You know, I always have plenty of other thoughts on that center spot.
Who's your favorite guy? If you could wave a magic wand.
Oh man, that's the thing is every guy that, so like I like Claxton, but I don't know if he weighs enough and has enough kind of physicality, but he's got the broadest level of versatility. Every center that I can think of, you know, I would prefer they actually really pursue the wing position. If they're going to make a big trade for like a 25 million plus type of player, I'd prefer that it'd be that route. And I'd actually rather, based on who I think is available, I'd rather they do the stopgap type of solution at the center spot than trade Dalton and a first for Claxton. You know what I mean? Like I like Claxton, but do I Dalton and a first like a Claxton? That I think that's why I brought that up first, is everybody's going to have a different line. Where's the Lakers? I think that's one of the big decisions of the summer.
I think I'm higher on Claxton than most because I'm also trying to factor in like what Luka wants. And I think that's the backdrop to this entire discussion is, how does Luka view this, right? Because there was this sense that Luka came, I mean, not even a sense, like Rob came out and essentially admitted that the first day Luka gets there, they go in his office and they start talking offense, and they're going through the way that Luka likes to play and the types of players he likes to have around him. And the first thing he says is he loves having a vertical lob threat. And Rob goes out and trades for Mark Williams, who doesn't fit that player archetype perfectly, but fits it enough where he's supposed to be an upgrade over Jackson. And then they end up rescinding the trade. But so I think with Luka, it's like, how does he view things, right? Does he want the Lakers to find that player now? And then maybe it is a Claxton or circling the block with Dallas and Daniel Gafford and seeing if you can work something out with that.
Do you think they can do a
or
deal?
Is there some patience there?
Do you think they can do a deal, Jovan? Do you think the Lakers and Dallas can? Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think Nico Harrison clearly just doesn't care about optics. So, but I mean, I guess they would probably, my read is they'd probably have to overpay. It would probably have to be something like, I mean, do you get like Gabe Dalton and a first for Daniel Gafford? And then that's a lot. I think that, like, and maybe you could lottery protect it or something, but that's a lot to give up for Daniel Gafford. I think that's more than he's worth. But then it gives them, they clearly need help in the backcourt. they had Najee Marshall running point guard for them down the stretch of the season, which I thought he did better than I expected him to, but still not a traditional point guard. Then Dalton gives you just a young piece, and then you get a protected first maybe, but that's a lot to give up for Gafford, and probably more than I'd want to give up. But I think if Dallas can say they won the trade optically, maybe they consider it, but I don't know. What do you think?
That I'm skeptical, and I think that's probably the only framework in which that really works. But then I don't want to make that trade if I'm on the Lakers' perspective. And the thing about the draft pick, it's like, when will the Lakers be able to trade a draft pick again after that? It'd be at the draft in 26 when that pick conveys.
They'd get the 2033 pick back, available.
Right, and so I feel like, if we're going to trade the first, I want to feel very strongly about the player. I like Gafford, but again, this is one of the big things that I go back and forth on is like, what is that first round pick worth, considering it's the only first round pick the Lakers have to trade?
And that's where with Claxton, I think on paper he checks a lot of the boxes, and even with the weight thing, his post defense I think is better than you would think, just based on his frame. And then I also look at the Lakers had that stretch of 24 games where they went 20-4, league's best defense, and Jackson was the primary center for a lot of it. And no one's going to look at Jackson and be like, that's the he's not an Andre Drummond, Steven Adams type, right? So right. I think if you can have a certain level of I think you need actually a certain level of mobility defensively for the way that the Lakers are going to want to defend under JJ. And I assume he's going to have a similar defensive scheme next season. So I don't know if you can just plug a Steven Adams or a Brook Lopez or even a Clint Capella who in there, right? So that's where I like Claxton, his switchability. He's a really good finisher around the rim. He's a lob threat. He's a really good rebounder. And I think one thing I know you've talked about a lot is I think you need a couple looks, right? So if you do go get the Claxton, can you find a behemoth to be the backup, right? And now you have three looks of Claxton, who's the more mobile, athletic starting center. You have the big bruising center coming off the bench, and then you also have your centerless small ball look, and you now have three pitches. I like that a little bit more. I don't know who that guy would be necessarily, because you are at that point probably out on Adams, maybe even a Day'Ron Sharp, who's someone I like. Might not be in on him. He's also a restricted free agent. So they're in a tough spot. I think that's really we've been dancing around it a little bit, but there's a lot of tough decisions they have to make with how they build this roster.
Oh, and on top of all that, that's not the only spot they need help at. They need help on the wings and at guard. Think of where the money is on this roster. All of it goes to the front court practically. We always talk about what a great contract Austin is on, and he's still our highest paid guard, depending on how you classify Luka, of course, but in terms of guys that defend guards. And so there's needs elsewhere. If you spend what Claxton I think makes $25 million this year, and he's got a descending contract, so the following year,
which I like that.
I'd like that too, for sure. But that's hardly the only need, Jovan, is that they got to be able to spend some on just somebody who can guard the best guy on the other team. So we're not asking Rui to do it or DFS to do it. And I think some of what JJ did was based on just the roster defensively. We don't have anybody who can guard these guys. Might as well switch, right? But that's sort of a temporary measure, ideally, that they got to resolve that too over the course of this offseason.
Yeah, and the other thing I've thought about with just looking at, because I've gone through every roster and every cap sheet and tried to figure out the perfect center for the Lakers, and I don't know that player exists, and I don't know that that's going to change come February. Maybe that changes next summer, but now how are you viewing this season? And I think that's the way to transition into what to me is the biggest decision for them, is which timeline are they on? Are they on a 2026 timeline or are they on a 2027 timeline? And I make that distinction because 2026, this is the last dance potentially with this core trio of LeBron, Luka, and Austin, depending on what happens with those guys, right? So LeBron, the latest reporting has been that he is likely to opt in, And in that case, his contract would expire in 2026. So he could either resign or retire or whatever he decides to do. Then you have Austin, who has that player option for 2026, 27, but he is almost certainly going to decline that, opt out, and get a bag next offseason. Then you have Luka. And is he extending, or is he going to put some pressure on the Lakers and play out the final year and then go into free agency next summer? So those are, I think, a lot of factors that they have to figure out within this summer. And are you trying to build the best possible roster now or next season for LeBron and giving him one final shot and showing Luka you're serious about, competing and contending and trying to give him a shot with LeBron? Or are you keeping your cap sheet clean? Maybe you are just using the 5.7 million taxpayer mid-level exception, and then going into the summer of 2026 with, I have it here, in theory, let's just assume for a second Luka extends. So Luka's under contract. You only have DFS most likely, whether it's some type of extension or him re-signing. Vando, Dalton, or Bronny. Those are the five guys you would have in this scenario under contract. So you'd have almost 80 million in cap space, somewhere around there. That's not factoring in cap holds and minimum salary slots and all that stuff. But you'd have some cap space to play with depending on what happens with LeBron and Austin. So for me, I take a step back and I just look at where's the urgency level with this? And are you trying to build the best possible roster for next season and viewing this as like a 1 year, can we just go all in and try to win with LeBron, Luka, and Austin? Or are we trying to keep our cap sheet flexible and relatively clean and say this year's maybe we'll do it the stopgap center. We'll try to find some value with minimum signings. And then next summer is really the summer we build around Luka and potentially, make that decision with Austin.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. That in some ways our first thing are one and the same in a respect of deciding how much do I want to go in all in right now and pay the price that I need to pay to be able to do that. Do you think that they can serve both timelines with some moves?
The two timeline approach?
The dreaded two timeline approach.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what, Jovan, you and I both know that when you got LeBron and Luka on the team, you can't go all the way toward, we're shooting toward the 27 season. There might not be a 27 season for LeBron. And so that to some extent, but I don't know, when you talk it out, there is some wisdom in building out long term. But what are we really talking about here? What is the distinction between one timeline or the other? What is the difference in how you would behave if you're serving the short term timeline versus the long term one?
I think it depends if you're willing to put the pick and Dalton on the table, right? I think those are two longer term assets that you have that I talked about this recently, but I think if we're ranking the Lakers' realistic trade assets, and for now, I'm not going to put Austin in there because I think the bar to trade him is high and might even be unrealistically high compared to how other people might value him. So in my opinion, it's the 2031, or 2032 first, whichever one a team covets, and then it's Dalton number 2, and then probably Rui number 3, then maybe Gabe 4, Kleba 5, or Shake, depending on what type of trade you're doing. But I think if I'm a team and the Lakers are approaching me about a center or any type of trade, whether it's a wing, guard, center, whatever, I'm asking for the first and I'm asking for Dalton.
Mm-hmm.
That is the starting point, and they already set the price with the Mark Williams trade and that was, I didn't even mention the swaps, and they have up to 5 potential swaps, depending, if they do one of the first, then they only have 4 swaps. But you already set the price for a center in Dalton, a pick swap, and a first round pick. So if I'm Dallas, that's what I'm asking for. If I'm Brooklyn, that's what I'm asking for. Then you figure out the matching salary. So I think it comes down to, are they willing to put the pick on the table? Mm-hmm. And that's been something that they've been hesitant to do in the past. They've liked having a pick going into the season. So I think if we'll see, I guess in the first week or two, or maybe even on draft night, if they trade Dalton and or a pick, then they are serious about this upcoming season in a way that's there's a clear urgency behind it. If they don't, then maybe they're waiting till the trade deadline, or they're just saying like, hey, this is kind of a stopgap season and we're really looking ahead to next season.
Yep. One thing I would add is if I'm Rob Pelinka and another GM is telling me, well, you already set the price with Dalton and the first round pick, I would say that is for another player that's on a rookie contract that I have team control over, that's going to be a restricted free agent in 2 years. So he's still probably not going to walk, that I don't have to trade out any matching salary. One of the unique things about Williams, well, not unique, basically him and Kessler, and maybe there's another 5 I can think of, but to get a starting caliber center, somebody that's good enough to address the job, you either have to get a really good player on a rookie contract, which is automatically you got to pay a premium for that player, or it's going to be somebody that almost necessitates that it's either Rui or Kleba plus Gabe just to get to the amount of salary that you need to be able to get there. Because I agree with you from an asset evaluation standpoint of how the Lakers assets rank, but Dalton just makes what, $4 or $5 million next year, that he's not going to be able to get you enough salary ballast to get to. And like, if we're talking about trading Rui and Dalton, then I want a really good player coming back if that's the case. And so just something to consider. I think that's part of the reason why they gave up as much as they did. And you also, what you said earlier about they go into Rob's office, Luka says, this is what I want. I think there's a certain amount of, you want that? I'm going to show you in the first 48 hours or whatever it is that I'm serious about getting you what you want. I think there's a little bit of nuance to it where Williams being on a rookie contract plays in a lot on this.
Well, but then they have a month between the start of free agency and Luka's extension date to show him they're functionally going to have their roster in place, going into training camp, barring, of course, there are exceptions where maybe someone makes a deal right before the season, but like likely August 2nd rolls around, that is the roster that is starting the season. And in that case, Luka, I mean, I think he's going to resign or extend, but if they're bringing him on a platter, like our setters are Clint Capella and Jackson Hayes is back as a backup, or we've converted Christian Coloco to the backup center spot, like, I'm not saying he's not going to extend at that point, but that's not the best sales pitch, in my opinion.
It's certainly not. So, and how much pressure does he want to put on? That's something that we don't know. We don't know kind of how aggressive he's going to be there.
So what's your next decision?
Is LeBron's opt-in? I suppose that's not a Lakers decision, but it certainly it impacts the team. It
counts.
Like LeBron and DFS and just sort of like the power forward position, sort of sorting out the like roster imbalance, I think is one of the bigger issues going forward. Is how do they decide to? They've got so many forwards, so much money wrapped up in the front court and is there like? I know I'm hitting like 3 things. It's basically the roster imbalances. My main point, but like, is there a way to go to Luka or just go into the season in general and be like, yeah, we don't have that great 5 that we want because he's not actually available, but we got to a very good team in a different way. Like, how flexible can the Lakers be within this team build?
How do you view Rui within this? Because he, to me, has been the more I've thought about the offseason, I view him as the pivot point, because if we're going to take what they've said at face value in terms of Luka, LeBron, and Austin are the 3 pillars, that's their big 3, those are the 3 guys that they're building around, and they want to keep Austin long term. Okay, so we take what they've said at face value. If they're bringing in a center, then you look at that 5th spot within the starting group, and I don't think Rui is the optimal 5th guy. And I think offensively he can be, with his spot up shooting and ability to attack closeouts and the cutting, and like he fits well. He's turned himself into a 40+% 3-point shooter. But defensively, you either need a big defensive wing or a big defensive guard, or maybe someone who could do a bit of both and guard 1 through 3. And whoever is the best opposing perimeter scorer, that's the primary guy then the secondary guard is going to be defended by Austin. The secondary forward is going to be defended by LeBron. Then you're kind of hiding Luka as a helper, and then you have the rim protector. And like that's your defensive starting point. At that point, then it becomes there's still some overlap where if you have LeBron, you have Luka, you have Rui, you have DFS. I don't know if you could enter the season or you could enter the season with all four, but I don't know if the optimal version of this roster has all four together just based on the limitations with the cap and roster construction. So I almost view Rui as the guy where because of the expiring nature of his contract, like is he the, and I think he has more value than DFS just based on age. And I think he's a better player right now than DFS. Like, is he the guy who you maybe have to send out in some type of trade to go get that center or go get that defensive perimeter player that better fits around Luka, LeBron, and Austin?
If your goal is to get to a settled version of this roster by the end of the summer, and I think you laid out that argument for the reasons why that's beneficial very well, I don't see how you can get to that without trading Rui in his contract, right? Like his contract along with the fact that he is a quality player, right? And so Gabe and Kleba add up to $22.5 million worth of salary. That's about a low-end, medium-end starter in the NBA if they're not on a rookie type of contract. That fills one of your holes of the needs of like big man and wing defender. But to get to that second player, to fill both of them and really have that settled in roster that can really go for it, I just don't see the math working. Like, maybe Vando, maybe there's a team out there, but I view him as a negative asset most likely around the league. That I'd be surprised if a team.
You have 3 more years left.
Yeah, it's a long time, and that's something that we always look at the money. I think that GMs and front office people look at the years a little bit more because there's a certain amount of you're tangled up in wires if you're a GM or front office person with all the rules and cap regulations and all the things like that, hey, can I get out of a little bit of money so I can make a damn move so that I can sign a free agent so that I can just have a little more flexibility? And this has been compounded by the new CBA as well. So that a guy that you can't necessarily trust, to play regular rotation minutes in the playoffs, signed for 3 more years. That's a bad thing. And so I don't see how they get to fill both of those needs unless they can get a guy on their rookie contract.
That's where, again, I come back to, like, I think they have 5 primary trade assets. And I think to go all in on next season, you probably have to trade at least 4 of the 5, if not all 5, to address both holes. And so in theory you could do, and the 5 again are the first round pick, Dalton, Rui, Gabe, and Maxey. If you can get those 2 guys and then use your taxpayer MLE on another rotation caliber player, all of a sudden that roster it's interesting to me, and it's potentially better balanced depending on the caliber of player you could find with that exception and what you do with the minimum signings. And I think there's also an element here of like, we don't know how certain things are going to play out and affect the Lakers, where the Giannis trade, right? The KD trade and the fallout from that, like looking at Boston and how they were able to go get Drew Holiday, like you never, because of the Dame situation, like you just don't know how or what the trickle down effects are going to be with some of these scenarios. And I go back to last summer, and a guy like Gary Trent Jr. gets like one of the things again with Vando is like it's despite the cap going up, it's every dollar matters even more now, and teams I think are hesitant to pay a certain caliber of player like double-digit millions, even if based on the percentage of the cap it's going up and it's not hurting you as much. I think there's like the middle class of the NBA is getting squeezed right now, where it's sort of like you want to pay for stars and you want to pay for high-level starters, and then you want guys on bargain contracts. That middle class is sort of like the no man's land with that. So a guy like Gary Trent gets squeezed, and then he goes to Milwaukee for a minimum. Lakers could have potentially got him. That's a whole other aside. But who's the next Gary Trent Jr.? Who's the guy that I think you've mentioned Bruce Brown before as a guy who you could potentially see getting squeezed, and like that would be like if they could get him for the taxpayer or a vet minimum, like that would be awesome. But like I think the Lakers, there's an element of this like we just don't. There's so many dominoes left that are going to affect them that they could potentially benefit from something shaking out that we don't anticipate.
That's part of it's interesting. How much are you proactive versus reactive in your approach to the offseason? Because I think that what you just laid out illustrates a level of there might be more benefit in being a little reactive from Isaac Okoro is available for free from Cleveland, basically. Mm-hmm. That, hey, we could use a wing off of the bench that guards people, that's got a little bit of athleticism that might, whereas if you have a concept of, okay, we need to fill the center spot, we need a defensive wing, this is where we're going to spend all our assets, like you need to have both. You need to have the plan going in, but also a level of reactivity to, Giannis is getting moved in a 3-team deal, or hey, could we be the 4th team in on this to help that work out? And I think that Rob and his people being on top of the intel around the league in terms of like who's talking about what and where the Lakers can kind of get in where they fit in to get an extra asset. Even if it's like long-term, Lakers only have one tradable 2nd-round pick. Those are a currency of sorts as well that can get you a DFS type of player that if we can make a deal that we get a couple 2nd-round picks back, that can be help. There's so many different versions of this offseason. It's part of the reason why I'm so excited about it is it can be so many different things.
We haven't talked about Austin yet, really, outside of a little bit of his free agency and his contract situation. Where are you at with Austin and his fit around Luka? And that, to me, is the potential red button of the offseason, right? Mm-hmm. If we're talking about Rui as the pivotal guy and Dalton and the 1st-round pick as the markers of how serious they are about the urgency of the short term, Austin and the potential of trading him is the move that's the one that really shows you, again, depending on what type of player they're getting back, like that shows you they are serious about building around Luka potentially and maximizing that. And maybe it is more of a future move. But with Austin and his fit with Luka and just his contract situation and the big picture of it all, how do you view him within this?
I think he's more of I've talked about getting this team to where it needs to be taking a couple of transaction cycles. I think it's the deadline. It would be the absolute earliest to move him unless Giannis is on the table or, one of a handful of players. I think the Lakers will want to try to make it work and try to make that fit work. I think they like Austin a lot and would really like to build around him rather than, than move him. And so I'd be very surprised if they moved him over the course of this summer. And in terms of his fit, again, I have skepticism that you can have a defensive closing 5 that can win a championship with Luka and Austin. I also think there is a lot of room to grow, and Luka coming really changed the dynamic for Austin in a way that I do think that having a year in a training camp and all of that will be super helpful. And when they were on the court together, and especially if LeBron was off, they were really good. I think that there's something to build on, and that sort of dynamic of Luka next to a smaller, quicker ball handler, creating enough offense together to really create a problem. Similar with Brunson, similar with Kyrie, although Austin's not that level of on-ball player. I do think figuring out sort of like the on-ball versus off-ball mix and all of that, I think there's a lot to sort of sort out. And also putting Luka aside, that was year 1 for Austin in one of the highest level jobs in the NBA, which is you run the offense for a few minutes when you're on the court and we give the ball to you. That there's going to be some growth in year 2 of that even putting Luka aside, that I think that we'll get some benefit from that. So like I'm skeptical about Austin's fit long-term, and I do think that there's possibly a move long-term, but I don't even think they need to do that prior to his contract expiring. I do think they can re-sign him to a market value deal that if you need to move him down the line, you could move him down the line if it doesn't work. But I think he's a good player that if I kind of bristle at the idea of him as a pillar, the same way that Luka or LeBron would be, but maybe he's a smaller one. Not all pillars are the same size.
Yeah, it's a wobbly chair. I don't know, but yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I get a lot of Austin questions in my mailbags and my Q&As, and I've been saying that I think the best approach with Austin, in my opinion, because right now, I think a thing that doesn't get talked about enough with Austin is that he's functionally an expiring contract. He's an impending free agent. And if you are trading for Austin, in theory, like it's going to cost a lot. And whatever you are giving up, you are not trading for Austin just to have him next year on a team-friendly contract. You're giving up whatever you're giving up to have him be a part of your core, whether that's as your primary ball handler, secondary ball handler, whatever. But he could leave. And right. So there's an element of like he has some power here and some control here of he does not have to give any assurances to, we know how these things work. There'll be some back channel communication in terms of, hey, if we trade for Austin, is he going to consider or be open to staying here, resigning here, whatever? Like he has some power in how that goes. So I think that also affects his trade value to an extent, where on paper we see the contract of, okay, he's got one more year, potentially two, if he somehow doesn't opt out, but I think he's going to opt out. Like that's on paper has a lot of value, and he's a good player in his mid-20s. But he has some control here, and he could dictate the terms of engagement to an extent if he says, I don't want to be in this place, or I'm not going to re-sign, or even just more simply, like I'm going to test free agency and see what my options are, see where the best fit for me is. So I think that affects his trade value in the short term. But to your point, like I think that the best move, in my opinion, would be playing out this season, seeing where the fit is at. And if you still have some fit concerns, or it gets even worse, or he is not the same player again in the playoffs next season, then you re-sign him and then you try to flip him ahead of the 2027 deadline. And that's when you pull the plug on it. And then at that point, he's making 30 plus million, and you could get another big piece back. And I think he'll still be a solid value on that contract. I don't think he's going to turn into a pumpkin. So I think like that might be a longer term move for a couple seasons from now.
That's a much more eloquent way of saying what I was trying to say at the front end of it being tomorrow's problem, right? That I think that down the line you can re-sign him. If it doesn't work, they didn't have enough of a sample size with a team that was intended to be built around Luka and Austin and all of that. I think there's a let's give this a chance first notion that I think has a lot of validity.
Can I make a quick pitch here where you mentioned Brunson and Kyrie, and Austin is not the same caliber of player that Kyrie is. I think it's close with that version of Brunson. If you actually look at the regular season numbers, Austin's regular season numbers this season were better than Brunson in his final year at Dallas. Now, I think clearly like Brunson was this hidden gem within Dallas's rotation that we like once Luka went down that postseason, he took off to a different level, looked like a star, kind of similar to like a James Harden in OKC situation where then the stars align, he goes to New York and now he blows up. MVP candidate, first team All NBA guy. Like he's been awesome. So I think when we think about the current version of Brunson, like different class, a couple tiers at least away from Austin, but I think there are some similarities to like the way that those two guys function around Luka and the success that those teams had making the conference finals in 2022, making the finals in 2024. I think Austin can do some similar things with his pick and roll ability and just the versatility of his offensive game. And then I would contend defensively, he's better than both of those guys. Like I just from a size perspective, but also I think Austin's defense gets picked apart in a way that, in my opinion, is unfair sometimes. And I think he holds up well against guards. It's when he gets switched onto bigs or bigger wings that they can overpower him. But I would contend the same thing is true with a Jalen Brunson or a Kyrie. So from a fit perspective, I know it's not he's not the perfect fit with Luka. But I also look at like if they trade him, who's running the offense when Luka's off the floor? And if you're telling me
it was already an issue,
it was already an issue. But if you're telling me it's going to be Gabe Vincent or Bronny, or you're going to go get a minimum guy to be like like you need multiple ball handlers. So and it's not going to be LeBron more than it was last season necessarily. And like they still needed Austin within that, right? So I view trading Austin now as also like if you're trading Austin for Nick Claxton or Jared Allen or whoever is like your top center target, you now have a giant hole in the backcourt in terms of ball handling, shot creation, playmaking, just running the offense. Like that's not going you want a more heliocentric offense. Like I just, that's one where I think people look at the holes at center and wing and are like, let's send out Austin and plug this hole. But I'm like, you're creating another big hole in the backcourt that I don't think you just solve with a taxpayer MLE guy or a minimum guy.
I think that's 100% true, and it's why Austin should have that job in the short term. The one thing I would say what distinguishes him from Kyrie and Brunson is that they are very definitive on-ball guys in terms of like they're higher level on the ball than Austin is. I think this is part of my fundamental disagreement with kind of how they've grown and developed Austin, even though he's a 25-5 guy. He's really good and he's good at this job. But I think that what can be the championship level player of Austin is the all-around version of him, the version that does that a little bit, but isn't relied upon to lead. Like you said, that is a whole job that it's a massive hole if Austin walks out. I just think that he's more well-suited to be a guy who does that a bit, but is also an off-ball player, is also doing some other things. You know what I mean? That it's more of a well-rounded type of thing. Whereas with Brunson's in the game, you're going to give him the ball. Kyrie, you're going to give him the ball. They can play off-ball a little bit, but that's really like they're the masters at that. Whereas it's one of many things that Austin does well.
I think he needs to get better and more reliable as a catch and shoot guy. And going back to the last couple postseasons, 10 games overall. So like a minuscule sample size, but that's just the postseason. The postseason is always a minuscule sample size. But like looking at I just talked about this, but looking at the conference finals run, Brunson shot 40% on catch and shoot threes in 2022. Looking at the finals run, Kyrie shot 42% on catch and shoot threes in 2024. This past against Minnesota, Austin shot 34%. And then against Denver, he shot 17% on catch and shoot threes. So that's an area where like if he gets, and then the 2023 run, he was at 47%, which is an astronomically high number. That's unsustainable. But like if he can get back to being a 40-ish% catch and shoot guy where you can't help off of him and he really makes you pay, that's also where I see the fit improving offensively.
No, I think that's spot on, and it's essential. One point that Trudell would always make in the whole like quest for more ball handling next to LeBron is that it's a regular season-ish type of problem in that once you get to the highest levels, LeBron's going to have the ball in his hands a certain amount that Austin, 2/3 of the shots that he took in the playoff series against Minnesota were threes. And that's a totally different mix than it was during the regular season when he was on the ball and creating a lot more. And so that like, are you using the regular season to do the job that you're actually going to be doing in the playoffs, or is it going to have to flip? I think it's part of the disagreement that I have with Austin, but we're also sort of down this road a bit. And like you said, it's a huge need on a Lakers team that if Luka or LeBron aren't handling that, like you need somebody to run the offense.
Assuming that the Lakers make a trade for a center or a wing, what type of player would you like for them to try to find with, again, most likely the 5.7 taxpayer MLE?
I think that's the best usage of the backup big man spot. So I think like Brogdon and Bruce Brown are the two guys that come to mind for possibly the 5.7. Exum and Melton missed too many games to get that, but if you could get them on vet mins, they're two of my favorites in the backcourt. I think like defensive guards with size and athleticism is something that's pretty high on my list. I think you can kind of cheat a little more in that direction because you got Luka on the ball. And yeah, I think that there's a decent chance we send Gabe out, and can we get his replacement, and can he be 6'5" instead of Gabe's height? You know, I think that those are, and then there's this cluster of big men that are possibly in that range, you know, at that 5.7 spot, of which Capella might be one of them. Now, you know, I think most of them are likely to stay where they are, like Steven Adams, Kevon Looney being another one. But I think sort of that bulky was just a starter in the NBA, but not really a starter anymore type of guy. Brook Lopez, although I don't think he loved his time here, so I'm not sure he would come back. But yeah, there's this sort of cluster of like 5 big guys in that range. Who are you looking for at that spot?
I'm with you. I think ideally you use it on a backup 5 spot. I wonder, again, like the market can play out a variety of ways, and it is a game of musical chairs to an extent. So if one of these guys leaves or gets a bag from someone, a relative bag, most likely being non-taxpayer MLE money, then that maybe artificially inflates the market for some of these guys. And I view Adams and Capella as probably more than taxpayer MLE caliber players, but not quite the full non-taxpayer. So, and you don't have to use the full thing, although it still triggers the first apron. I mean, another thing here that we haven't talked about, and I don't think has been discussed enough, is like there is another way to create some flexibility with signing one of these guys, and you could dump. And now Brooklyn's the team that stands out with a bunch of cap space. There are some teams that in the offseason, because of the apron rules, like you can finagle a way to dump some of these guys. But you could theoretically trade a Gabe or a Kleba. You're going to have to attach almost certainly the first round pick. And that's the big pill to swallow here. But if you do that and you just clear that off of your cap sheet, if LeBron does not take the pay cut, you can still clear the non-taxpayer MLE, and that's where you're like, maybe that's your primary addition at that point, or you can do like a Rui and Dalton for something else, and then you're plugging the 2 holes that way. I haven't seen that discussed a lot. Like, and it's just a different way of creating that flexibility rather than trading the first round pick in an actual deal for a player. You can use it to facilitate a salary dump, but that again, now you're hard capped at the first apron, and there's some things you got to figure out with that. But like, that's another thing, I guess, depending on how aggressive they want to be and how win now they are. But I'm fascinated by this because as you laid out, like there's a lot of different ways this can go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what's exciting is sort of they have different versions of different trades, like anywhere from a small $3 to $5 million deal to the red button deal where you send out 50 million plus of salary and totally revamp the team, and a lot of versions in between. And that's a good place to be if the market's going to be as active as we expect it to be. And I also think that's another argument for being somewhat reactive. Like we were talking about, you asked me who I would spend 5.7 on. I think there's also a conversation about when you spend the 5.7 I bet that game of musical chairs that Gary Trent had to play is going to play out again with a couple of guys. And if you have a little bit more to offer, that guy that doesn't have, like, oh yeah, we could give you the 5.7 guy that wanted the MLE, but now it's July 5th and you don't have that from anybody. Like, I think that there is some value in waiting and reacting, but you also don't get exactly what you want, but I'm not sure there's a route toward getting exactly what we want.
Another guy I want to mention quickly that I like, depending on this game of musical chairs and just his team's cap sheet, is Amir Coffey. I like Amir Coffey as a potential bench wing 8th, 9th type guy in your rotation. He's more of a scorer than a wing defender, but I think just having a guy at that size of around 6'7", athletic, I think is better defensively than some of the Lakers options last season, deeper in the rotation. He's a guy that, whether it's a minimum or maybe a partial version of the taxpayer MLE, or maybe if they really get squeezed, the full taxpayer MLE, like I think he's a little bit higher for me than some of the other options in a similar range.
No, I like Coffey too. It's funny, the Clipper fans that I know can't stand him and like want to. I mean, this is not unusual for a fan base to be like, oh, that guy stinks, right? Like, it is what it is. But there are a lot of options, sort of in the cheaper ranges of this guy can be helpful. That in the view of this is going to take a little bit to build the team, to build a title contender. If you can get a 7th man, an 8th man this year that isn't the starting center that we're talking about, that isn't the lockdown defensive wing, but just a solid two-way guy that can come off the bench and play 2 shifts for us in the playoffs. That's a huge win, and that's a big part of what the market is going to be this summer too, that I'm super excited about. All those type of names, Emir Coffey, and there's just several guys that it's like, oh, that guy might be ready for a step up in role. And if the Lakers can nail that, like, those are the real value contracts that you were talking about earlier that teams really excel off of.
I will close with this. The back end of the roster cannot be as bad as it was this past season.
I thought they nailed
at the beginning of the season or at the end of the season.
I loved the two ways. This was one of my favorite years for two-way contracts.
100%, I agree.
But shoot, if you put that 5 versus the 5 that we had at the end of the bench, like 11 through 15, I'm not sure 11 through 15 beats the two ways last year. And so, I think part of that was a function of the player options that they gave out 2 years before to Christian Wood and to Jackson and to Cam and all of that, that it's like, just got to play it out. I hope they don't do that again.
I hope so too. And, at the time, again, when the whole Gary Trent situation, it was like, just eat the money and try to sign the guy if you can get that agreement. And they ended up having to waive 2 of the minimum guys with player options anyway during the course of the season for lesser players. So, but I digress with that. Pete, this was awesome. Thank you so much for your time. It was far too long in between podcasts, so we will have to do more of these soon.
Much sooner.
And good news, we will be doing more of these
soon
because of our partnership at Odyssey, along with Anthony Irwin. We will be having a new Lakers podcast, the Great Western Forum, where we will be launching, I think the day after the draft, tentatively, is our plan right now. But this is going to be more of a free-flowing conversation, a fun time with your favorite Lakers podcasters, content creators, and we're going to have maybe some bigger guests on, but also your favorite people that you hear all the time on our shows. So you'll be hearing a lot more from Pete and myself and Anthony. Anything you want to plug before we get out of here other than LFR, which is one of the best podcasts in basketball, period. Forget Lakers. It is one of, I listen to every show, and I've said this before, but as someone embedded in covering the team on a daily basis, I still learn things or see things from a different perspective every time I listen to you and Darius. So I recommend everybody check it out.
I'm honored, man, and I'm watching Buha's Block on YouTube all the time. That's my way of listening to your show, man. So keep doing what you're doing. Nothing to plug on my end, and let's chat again soon.
Let's do it, man. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back next week. I will talk to you then.